Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, take two. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this fourth session of sessions by MDE and MCTM. And if you can advance the slide, please. Okay, so that we put these together as an opportunity for educators to connect and share information, especially during this very unique summer that we're all experiencing. And just some brief, you'll hear some brief introductions from the St. Paul team, but I'm going to turn it over right now then to St. Paul with Math with Me. There will be time for questions during the presentation, but feel free to chat in ongoing. And then we'll come back just briefly at the end with upcoming opportunities. So welcome, Math with Me team. Turn it over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to have Rachel start off the meeting and kind of introduce everybody involved in the project and kind of how it all got started.
Yeah, so we'll do just kind of maybe a quick, super quick, just so people can see your picture and what they look like in real life. So I'll start really quick. I'm Rachel. I'm in the bottom right-hand corner, and then I'm going to throw it to Sophie. If you want to just say hi so they can see you on Zoom.
Hi, I'm Sophie. Is Mariana here? Otherwise, I'll throw it to May.
Hi, I'm May.
I'm Morgan.
Casey, good morning.
I'm Colin.
Patty, you here?
Oh, I'm unmuted. I'm muted. Sorry. Hi, I'm here. I'm Patty.
All right, Morgan, you can hit next.
Yep.
Okay, so before we go into what this project is, we just wanted to give a quick little background of what prompted us into this, because it didn't just come out of nowhere. It came from some stress. After we went into Q4 in St. Paul and distance learning, we went through a couple weeks, and the first few weeks went okay, I guess, and we felt like it was okay, but we just didn't feel really great about anything that we were doing. It felt like we didn't have a ton of students, just like everyone else, showing up online, and it just didn't feel like anything that we were used to that felt good about teaching. So we were kind of just looking at how can we just get through this and get through the end of the year and be done. So I called up Morgan and I was like, hey, we got to come up with a plan. And actually I just texted her that. And then before we even had a chance to talk about the plan, she sent me a picture that you see on the screen here, which was a list of all the things that she would imagine that we could do through the end of the year. And when I saw that list, my heart just dropped. And I was like, oh, I love Morgan, but I hate that list. So I texted her and I was like, can we talk about it? And then she called me and we ended up having like an hour-long conversation about just, we're not thrilled about all the things on this list, but there's got to be something better that we can do. So like, what could we do? Who could we call? Who could we brainstorm with? So we called up Sophie, and Sophie was having the same feelings. She was just kind of feeling down and out about teaching. It wasn't the same, wasn't great. We called up Colin. Colin works with he's the district math coach in St. Paul, and he works with a bunch of teachers, and he was saying that a lot of teachers are feeling the same as we are. So it just wasn't great. So what we decided to do is call up a few other teachers like across the whole district that were kind of like-minded, and we started to brainstorm what could we do to make something better? What could we do to take these lemons and turn it into lemonade? So we'll go through what the project looks like, but that's kind of where it all started, out of a state of not thrilled. But first, Morgan's going to talk about why it made so much sense and why it works.
Okay, so just really quick, you guys know that we love to notice and wonder. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is hit that chat. When you see this image, I want you to tell me what you wonder about this picture. And May, if you could just read some of those comments out loud for me, that would really help as well.
How old is this baby? What's wrong? Who pinched this baby? How long has baby been crying?
Why so sad?
So like all of these things, and like, isn't there like a part of you that just like wants to help this crying baby, right? And that's kind of like a function of us as humans. Like, we like our brains are actually hardwired for social connection, and so that's why we actually run to crying and annoying babies, right? Like we actually survived because somebody ran to us and took care of us when we were crying and annoying, right? And so I think like it's really important to understand kind of that basic need for social connection and how that impacts learning, to better understand, like, I think the reason why Math with Me is super, super important during this time. I think if we have like a more accurate understanding of our social nature and the need for that, we can actually like improve our lives, our communities, our schools, and our classrooms. So you guys, we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, right? It's something that we learn like right away in teaching school. And Matthew Lieberman, I'm sorry, is a social scientist, and he kind of thinks that we have this all wrong, right? He would make an adjustment to Maslow's hierarchy. And what he suggests is that love and belonging is a physiological need, right? Like that should be on the bottom level. It's actually like necessary for our survival, right? And so if that need isn't being met, we aren't going to be able to progress through that pyramid and kind of get to the learning that we want to see in our classrooms, right? And so just a couple of things, like I just want to make sure people are aware about their brains. Your brain actually reacts to social pain the same way it reacts to physical pain. So like right now, I want you guys to think about the last time you either like really bumped your knee or, you know, like you smashed your finger in a drawer, and just think about how well you would be able to learn about polynomial division at that point, right? Like think about like when you're experiencing social pain or social disconnection, your cognitive function actually decreases. Your capacity to memorize things is impacted, right? Your ability to connect ideas is also impacted. And so when our like social brain is excluded, you guys, we actually do see like a struggle to learn to our full capacity, right? And so I'm thinking about this and like our need for social connection, right? And then you kind of cue in distance learning, and like our schools, right? Like we're experiencing an increase in anxiety, we're experiencing frustration, we're experiencing like isolation. And we know that all of those things are actually going to lead to decreased cognitive function, right? And that's going to impede like the teaching and learning of mathematics. Now, this is something not just like students are experiencing. I think this is something that like educators are experiencing as well, right? And we became really uninspired in our teaching because like we had an inability to teach mathematics like with best practice, which is with social connection. And then I think like we saw a lot of different things. Like we saw students beginning to develop negative math identities, right? We saw students getting super frustrated or tuning out or just like really struggling to turn that computer on, right? And so I think about like all the stuff we know about our brain and how it actually works. And then I think about like distance learning and how that really kind of cuts off some of the most essential things that need to happen. And so, kind of with that idea in mind, I just want you guys to kind of keep that framework as we start to talk about like why we developed the project the way we did, right? I think if we like understand the social nature of our brains and we can like figure out how to do that with distance learning, I think we're going to see like kids enjoying learning math again and us enjoying teaching it. So the rationale, I just think like we have to do better than we did the last time. We have to be able to find like joy in learning. It can't just be a list of things on a checklist. It can't be a bunch of worksheets. It can't be just a bunch of like videos. Like we have to find joy in social connection through the teaching and learning of mathematics, even though we are doing distance learning. You guys, like deep down in my heart, I like fully believe that we can create like beauty and power in our togetherness. I think like learning together, like there has to be a way to do that safely. And I think like, honestly, like I do truly believe like, even if we find some struggle in engaging in some of the work and projects and with Math with Me, I do think it's going to be better than maybe some of the things we have done in the past. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. So as Rachel had mentioned earlier, I'm Colin, and I'm the secondary kind of math specialist for St. Paul. And when Morgan and Rachel and Sophie, who all teach at Humboldt, kind of approached me and said this, I get approached a lot with kind of the question, hey, are we allowed to do this? Can we do this? And the more that we got having conversation, the more I realized, wow, this is actually meeting a need that I'm hearing all over the place. This is not just something that I want to be like, yeah, cool, great. I'd love to see what Humboldt does, but what would it look like if we actually, one of the things I do love about my job is to be able to champion teacher ideas and work. And so this was really easy to get behind and say, what would it actually look like if all 37,000 of our kids came together, not just even a Humboldt secondary, but created that connection that I think is so missing right now. I mean, not just with our students, but in our greater community, just having some opportunities to connect. And we all know here, coming to a training about math with MDE, that we're always looking for ways to break down stereotypes about mathematics, break down paradigms about how math can be related to. And so what would it happen and what would it look like if it went not just district wide, but statewide? And so we were able to kind of last spring connect with some colleagues up in Duluth. And then it kind of grew last spring into, there were some individuals out in New Jersey and New York, and then over in California that wanted to start their own Math with Me California or Math with Me New York. But just even broader than that, this yearning and a need for connection, how mathematics and the beauty behind what we had put together could accomplish that. And so that was kind of where we had gotten from, and where we still coming back to today, and why we're reinvigorating it is because we do still think approaching a fall where there is a big mixture of not just distance learning, hybrid learning, and in person, but there's still that need for connection. And so that's why we're excited to kind of share how we're even envisioning bringing this into the beginning of the year. And so that was our kind of our why. And moving now into what is it exactly, and kind of what we're going to move into. Well, Sophie's going to break down kind of what is Math with Me Minnesota, in case you don't know with it or aren't familiar with it. And then we're going to kind of break down how we are pivoting it to meet the beginning of the year. Go ahead, Sophie.
I don't know if she's on. I'll do this while she's probably trying to get herself back on. So phase one is when you design the prompts for them. You're getting them to recreate something that you've done. So maybe if you are a third grade teacher and they're looking at a visual pattern, and so you create one that's like growing by 5. And so you just ask the students, you go and create something that grows by 5 with things in your house, with things in your neighborhood, whether you're chalking it or using cereal. And then you're also providing, you as a teacher, provide them the every step how to do it, and students can either recreate it or they can extend it. And the important part is that they're sharing it with someone that they are living with or someone in their neighborhood. So we have a lot of examples. Don't feel like you have to be in elementary or middle school, high school to get this done. And there's some great questions in there. And student response. These are real student responses. A lot of these come from Sophie's classroom over distance learning.
Yeah, sorry, my video quit for a moment, but it looks like you covered it, so it sounds good. Yeah, definitely check out these examples. It was really impressive to see what students came up with when you gave them that like creative space to try things. So
all right, I'm going to take over from here. So at this point, the students have been working on all recreated installations that the teacher has prepared, and they just do exactly what the teacher tells them to do. And they're able to talk about the patterns, they make notices and wonderings and what's happening. Now it's time for the students to move to phase 2. And in this phase, the teacher gives design requirements, and the student is supposed to come up with an installation that fits those requirements, those specific requirements. But then we have some teacher prompted examples of what that would look like. So maybe you might ask them to continue to make their pattern that grows by 7, or make a how many using 19 items. What we wanted you to see that through all the questions and different tasks that we have students doing, that we're spanning all the grade levels. So most of these tasks are appropriate for kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, depending on what type of math or where you are in math at that point.
And then phase 3, this is really where our students get to be really creative. You know, and this is not a linear process at all. Especially when we did this in the spring. A lot of us stayed in phase 1 for a long time, dipped into phase 2, back to phase 1. But phase 3 is really where they get to go and do what they want to do. You know, you give them the idea like, hey, you have to go create something in public for people to interact with, whether it's in your apartment hallway and you just post it on your door, or you're actually going out and putting an installation in the park, or chalking it on your driveway. But just something for others to interact with. So again, some examples that students themselves created and prompted based on just their experience that they've had with you with phase 1 and phase 2. And my question before I first joined this team, because I was probably the newest member on this team, and I said, wait a second, if I join this team, do I still have rigor? Do my students, are they still working on difficult math and are, productively struggling? And as I continue to talk to the team, it came down to, of course, because what are we really doing? We're asking them to create. We're asking them to really understand math, because if you don't understand the concepts behind it, how do you build it? Which one does it belong? Because you have to know a reason for each of those 4 elements for it to not belong. Or how do you build a visual pattern so that it does continue and something that's interesting? And so it really did hit at the rigor piece that I was looking for my students, and for me to be like, yes, this is a team I want to be on. And so if you're feeling skeptical, that was where I was with this whole project. And then, once they answered all my questions, I hopped on board happily, and this is where I am.
Awesome. Thanks. So that was kind of like our journey as to the 3 phases. That was kind of how we thought this could be rolled out to students to get used to what is math installation, how do you build one, and then eventually release into student autonomy for creation. We thought it would be helpful because we're all starting in the beginning of the year is how did we do this? And so here are some key things to kind of make it happen that we did in St. Paul. But if you wanted to say, hey, I want to do this, I don't know how to make this happen in my district for my classroom, my school, or even just district wide. The first and foremost thing was just getting the communication with and backing of leadership. I think one of the things that you all have now that I would readily utilize is that last bullet point is St. Paul has done it. But one of the first things that Rachel and Morgan did was just give me a call and pitch it to me. And from there, that was kind of my role, was to then tell my supervisor about it, tell the director of OTL about it, and really get the whole St. Paul leadership behind it. The other piece that we found a lot of success too was when we began, to May's point, aligning it with actual 4th quarter content at the time, was to say, hey, we could do a lot of visual patterns. Here's some other things that we could do in regards to a lot of people are into the year with either data analysis or they were starting a little bit of algebra and pre-teaching in that respect. And so what kind of math installations might fit with that? And so aligning it now, if you're starting at the beginning of the year, to 1st quarter content, and K-12 topics could be helpful. We'll have some resources on the next slide. And then as well, if you're going to kind of be piloting this, to build some examples in whatever learning management system that you work with. We use Schoology and Seesaw, and any resources that you see of ours will have a lot of those that anybody can look at and see. And so when we began to ask the question, okay, can we continue doing this? And what would it look like at the beginning of the year? We started to just ask the question, how do we, first and foremost, what is the most pertinent pieces of the beginning of the year? Things like rituals and routines, relationship and rapport building with students, et cetera. And how would Math with Me even fit within that, partner with that, or even become the catalyst to build all of that? Rachel, do you want to talk about it?
Yes, I do. I'm going to unmute and talk. So we just kind of came up with a generic list of all the things that we kind of think we do as teachers in the beginning of the year. And when we looked at this, like we thought about the project and the way we kind of built it in the spring, and we thought, okay, well, a lot of the things that we did then really addresses all of the things that we're trying to do in the beginning of the year. So when we start to do rituals and routines, like going through those phases, you're going to get a chance as both a teacher and for your students to practice doing number talks, practice doing visual pattern talks, practice doing which ones doesn't belong. Like you're doing that in the beginning of the year anyways to build, to use it throughout the year. So it's a good chance for you to use it through this project. Another thing is we give them like authentic experiences to have conversations about math in their homes. So like we're really assuming that in St. Paul anyways, that we're going to be distance learning. And this gives them a chance to like build patterns and have conversations around those patterns in their homes, with their families, with their siblings, with their community. I mean, and then getting to the point where they're creating their own math installation is where it gets kind of cool, because you're going to get to see them be creative. You're going to give them a chance to productively struggle. You're going to give them a chance to build their own math identity. You're going to give them a chance to be creative. And then in doing that and sharing those projects with the other people in their class, you're going to get to know kind of who they are. On one of the slides before, we had a student who did like a 3-hour Minecraft video where he built his patterns in Minecraft and then invited his friends on Minecraft to talk about those patterns and have math conversations on there. And like, we would have never thought of that, but that's how he decided to do his math installation. And it really allowed me to understand who he was in a different way that I didn't know all year. And I had another girl who just something really basic. She worked at McDonald's and she made her pattern out of like little sausage patties at McDonald's. And like, we ended up having a big conversation about her working there. And that maybe would have been something I wouldn't even have known. So just going through this project, it's going to be a chance for your students to get to know each other. And then you also getting to know your students. And the biggest part too, is that it allows students to feel like their work and their thinking is a part of something bigger than just the classroom. They're a part of something bigger, a bigger community. We had a student who in the spring, Morgan and I and Sophie, actually all of us, we were posting pictures of student work on Twitter, and one of my students found his picture on Twitter and was so excited, and he was telling me how he thought it was so cool that he was a part of this big project that seemed to be across the country, because there was people like retweeting from across the country. So it had like a very positive feeling for kids, I think. Morgan, did you want to add anything else?
I did want to add something.
Yeah.
So like a big part of this too is not only was like I trying to teach and inspire my students, but I was also like responsible for my kids and my niece, right? Like I was supporting them with their distance learning. And my niece has really, really struggled in school with mathematics, right? And when we went to distance learning, I really realized how much she was struggling. I don't think I understood kind of like totally where she was at until I started working with her on her stuff. And her distance learning mathematics was through an app, and she couldn't get the first problem, and she hated it. Like she hated doing school. She would try to think of all the reasons why she didn't have to do it. And so like part of this was kind of stemmed from that experience as well, because I did email her teacher and I said, you know what, from here on out, I'm going to work with Aubrey on math because I can kind of tailor the content to what she needs. And you guys, like, she literally is asking me every single day, like, can we do another one? Like, what's another math project we can do? Like, do you have another one I can try? Like, she literally is on my heels every day asking to do this stuff. But I think like one of the reasons why is, number one, she could access the mathematics in a way that she couldn't access before. but also like she was building stuff for her family. She was building patterns that my son built on and her stepsister built on. She had stuff that her mom was working on. It like really changed the way that like we kind of came together and interacted as a family. But it also like, instead of her making her feel like crap, like she did feel like she was super strong in mathematics. And I think that's the first time I've seen her feel that way since she's been in school. So I think there are like just really beautiful ways that we are allowing, or not allowing, that's the wrong word, we're encouraging families and communities to come together, to actually share the stuff they already have inside them that we aren't tapping into by going back to these instructional videos or these apps on our phone. And that was like the other piece. It actually gave my kids a way to get off of their iPads, to get off of their computers, and to actually like just find things in the house, find things outside, and like do the work outside in a way that was like fun again. So I think that was like another reason why I felt really, really strongly about doing this work. And you know, and like having, you know, the how many students we have, Colin?
37,000.
37, like, can you just imagine, like, we went on so many walks, right? Because we just couldn't be in the house anymore. Like, I feel like there's very little we can do safely anymore. And I just like thought about like how different those walks would be if we're coming upon, you know, all these different installations on our way, and how like excited we might be to see what we come across if we're just all like collectively building this, you know? And so to me, like, there is really truly a way we can come together and kind of get back to the social nature that we were, you know, feeling was so absent from that process previously. Anybody else want to add anything?
I'll just say for my class, like adding to that, like getting outside piece, we would create like number walks where they'd like have a progression of like post-it notes somewhere where the problem gets harder and harder, but like builds off the first one. And like my favorite video was two of my students are like cousins or something, so they like made it together, and like you can just see them outside. They like put them on trees, so they're just like walking outside. And the last one is their like little brother like holding up the final one. And it was just so sweet to see, you know, like family coming together, and like they're outside, like clearly they were having fun and like enjoying it. So like that joy piece that I feel like Morgan and Rachel and everyone keeps talking about was so like evident. It was really fun to watch that at the end of the year last year.
I'd like to add something too. I think I come from the year everybody else is in high school, and I'm a first grade teacher. And probably the most impactful thing that I saw was watching my kids. They would tape themselves in Seesaw and they would send it to me, talking to their parents. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you see? And then the parents would say something and the kids would be, no, that's not right. Look again. And then they would look at it again and they would come up with another guess. And it was just so neat how everybody was involved. So I got to meet the parents. I've got to see the aunts and the uncles. And a lot of first graders, second graders, third graders weren't allowed outside. Parents wanted to keep them inside. So they had to do their creating and their sharing within their environment, within their constraints of their house. So I had lots of cars and noodles and beans, but it was just really exciting. And the one thing at the end of the year, as I had an exit conference with my kids, the one thing that they all said every single time was, I had so much fun in math. And those are not words that you hear very often. And when you do hear those, you know that it's being impactful and you're doing the right thing.
And just to kind of add on to that, Mariana, on our phase 3, we had students write reflections on like the process. And I would say almost every single one talked about having their parents do it, and how like their parents would get really frustrated and struggle, but how they would end up just like laughing together, and how much like they didn't realize how much fun they were going to have with their parents and how much they were going to laugh and like learn together. And I think like that was super heartwarming to read, not just on like one reflection, but on so many of them.
Definitely. Do you want to hit next? Okay, so this, maybe somebody could put a link in the chat for other people to click on, but this is a link to all the resources created. So we quickly came together as a team of 8, and like we spent, I would say, a solid 3 or 4 weeks working all day, like full scale on this project because it just kind of consumed us. So we put together different examples of phases for all the grade bands. So we have 4 different grade bands on there. You're going to be able to go on there and look around if you haven't already. It's a lot of the same stuff that we had from the spring, but there's so much on there. Sophie created a video about how to create a hook video for your students. We have example videos. We have different parent letters you can send out, engagement guidelines. We have supply sheet ideas. So like everything's very copyable and very accessible. It's all built in a Google Doc. So you can take everything's in Google Slides. Like Colin was saying earlier, in St. Paul schools, we use Schoology and Seesaw. So we have a lot of resources that we've built also in Schoology and Seesaw available, but they're just the same as the ones we have on there in Google Slides. So it's super accessible. There's a frequently asked questions. There's so much stuff on there that you could probably spend at least a couple hours looking through it. We've put tons of time into it. And I know that as we start to put together some beginning of the year stuff, we're going to be adding that in there also, but it's going to look very similar. So a lot of the stuff that we already have is pretty solid in there. Want to hit next? Yep. Colin?
Yeah, so the other piece that has been really fun, and we've mentioned it kind of off and on, is getting a more broader movement involved with this. And so we started kind of Math With Me Minnesota was a hashtag that we were working on for a while and had a lot of teachers tweeting to it. And that's kind of grown to, there's a Math With Me California that has kind of been growing, and we've created social media accounts for all of these as well. We have a Facebook and Instagram, and even I think in the registration there's a link to our blog that we had started that I think we're going to continue with. And I think our real goal with this is that this doesn't feel anymore like a niche project. This really feels like we're hitting, and it's also not just a filler anymore. The more that we kind of have talked about this, the thing that we keep coming back to is this really feels like how mathematics can and should be experienced by students, where student work is highlighted, is used for learning, where students have autonomy and feel empowered to go do and make something, and that it actually drives their learning. I mean, everything around Zaretta Hammond's culturally responsive instruction is embedded within this, where students have the capacity to be seen, to be heard, and to have some semblance of voice in their learning, some voice and choice within that. And so social media has been a great way that we've been able to kind of, again, connect with not just other districts, but with each other as we are still working remote and going to be learning remote in St. Paul. But this is just a place we also wanted to put here to say, hey, if you want to see examples, if you want to see how other people are thinking about it, check out any of these hashtags on Twitter, or you can go to our thread on Facebook or Instagram, etc. And the other thing that we wanted to just quick point out was that on the 25th of August, MDE is also going to be having a session with Math on a Stick and Christopher Danielson, who's another local friend of ours. And a lot of the stuff that we have kind of we're working on building off this came from Morgan's work with Christopher and their public math installations that they had been working on. Morgan, do you want to say anything about that work and kind of how you saw it similar to this?
Yeah, so I've been working with Christopher over the past few years on kind of creating these public math installations that people would just kind of like happen upon. So it's not like they're specifically seeking out this math experience. It just happens to be there, and becomes kind of like this joyful experience with math. And it's not kind of the opposite of, I feel like, how we've structured school of math in a sense. And so I'm really grateful for that experience, because I think it really helped when me and Rachel were having that discussion about how do we expand that, right? How do we create that in more places, and how do we allow students to have agency in that process as well? I'm not 100% sure with the August 25th.
No, yeah, no, just the public math installation. So
Yeah.
if you want to, know more about how those are set up, or I'm sure Christopher will talk about
Yeah.
his vision
Yep.
with kind of stick there.
Yep.
Cool.
I included the link in the chat to
Okay.
his.
Thanks.
So I think we're ready to open up for questions. Would you guys agree?
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and then we can kind of come back together. If you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or you can write it in the chat window.
Questions or comments
Or comments.
or concerns.
Yeah.
I have one question. My name is Christy. I'm from Northfield. I am wondering if you had any like fight back from parents, especially maybe parents that are really more of a traditional mindset in mathematics, and just how you talked through that with them.
So I didn't have any pushback from parents, but that is something that I was super concerned about in the beginning. I wanted to be super clear that we are not dumbing down mathematics. To me, the stuff that you're building just with those 4 activities, the number talks, the how many, the visual patterns, those are some of the most essential kind of skills and foundation that you need as a mathematician. So students can figure those things out and do those things super well. Once you're back in my classroom, I can, you know what I mean? I can shoot you super far. We can go wherever we want. But to me, I think those are the things that I want my students to have more than I want them to be able to calculate standard deviation quickly. I want them to have number sense, right? I want them to understand how to decompose and compose numbers. I want them to be able to see patterns and the beauty in those patterns. And if they can see that, if they can extend those patterns and they can start to, we can help them to generalize them, right? If they can see that process, they can see what's the same, they can see what's different. It's not going to take us hardly any work to get them to write quadratic equations, exponential equations. You know what I'm saying? So to me, my argument would be that I'm making them a stronger, because now we have the freedom to do that, I'm making them a stronger mathematician than they would have if maybe we kind of continue down that path. And I think that's the other thing about this. This is the idea of being in distance learning and kind of having everything kind of shaken up. It gives us a chance to rethink how we teach mathematics and what is best. And so I didn't have any parent or pushback that way, but to me, I feel the stuff we chose, we were extremely intentional with. And I think I could argue and make a case for why that's even more important than what we were doing before. And I really think about that with my niece, right? I really think about why she was struggling and why she was so unsuccessful with those apps, and how now how that has really changed the game and her position in that place, right?
And I'm in kind of the opposite position of Morgan, where a lot of my students are. I taught 8th graders who were taking 10th grade geometry. And so they were really looking to be well, what unit are we on, And so I put in the chat, we were doing circles at the end of the year. For me, I'm circles we don't see circles beyond geometry anymore. But because that was the end of the unit and their parents are probably your parents who knew what was coming up next. And so we did which one. I gave them all the properties with circles and tangents and secants. And we talked about them and I said, now your job is to create a which one doesn't belong. Create one where, you're going to have to go talk to somebody else about it too. And you have to tell them which one you think doesn't belong. And you have to have a conversation with them about which one they think doesn't belong. And they can't just go surfacey and say it looks different or go with the color, So we were really I asked my students to dig in with their parents or whoever it is that they were talking to about the properties, even though the person they were talking to didn't know anything about circles, So I kept it on topic for them because of, it's I think the same worry as you, Christy, is the pushback from parents saying, hey, they're supposed to be learning about this. How come they're doing this now? But it was a much richer conversation. And I feel like the properties had more meaning than just, here they are, now just do the product secant property,
Do y'all mind if I interject?
Go for it.
I'm the math supervisor of St. Paul Public Schools, and I often, well, I get faced with these type of questions all the time. So usually one of my quickest candid responses is this. In many other languages such as German, Spanish, etc., to know something has two different words. And when I'm saying know, I'm saying K-N-O-W. All right, so one way to know something is to learn it through a book, learn it through research, learn what someone tells you. Another way to know is through experience, okay? And sometimes you use one or the other, sometimes you use a combination of two for kids to learn. For example, we work with teenagers all the time. We can tell them stuff till they're blue in the face, but at some point they have to experience things in order to learn. So I like to use that analogy with parents when they push back on this type of learning. They're used to traditionally being told information, but when we help kids experience math, it's going to take their learning to the next level. And when I usually give that short speech, people's defensiveness is really drop because they can see the logic in what I'm saying.
Can I ask you a question? Hi, I'm Allie. I teach in Minneapolis, and I teach, I'm Morgan. I teach 7th and 8th graders, usually in multi-age classrooms. And I actually did sort of a hybrid. I did do projects in public math and had them creating diamond puzzles, and a lot of them put them out on, you know, people's alleys and on sidewalks with chalk, and left them for the mailman and left them on the refrigerators and stuff like that. But then I feel like I ended up having all these conversations one-on-one with students about like taking quadratic equations from these, you know, like diamond puzzles where you add two numbers. It's like for factoring. But then the more, you know, technical, how do you extend this into generalizing it, ended up being these one-on-one conversations with me and 100 kids. And that's a lot of time. And I never figured out the way to have them, you know, they talk to their parents, they talk to their neighbors, but they never talk to each other. It was me having these hundreds of hours of conversations with them to extend it every single time. So I never had problems with the parents. They understood. That wasn't my issue. But then I ended up trying to like put it into a, you know, a Google Doc or transfer it into this to make it something a little bit more, oh, this is how you would factor a quadratic equation and why. And I just feel like I never quite figured out how to have like some sort of a group dialogue or discussion to take their work that was so interesting that they love to do into the level of like, now let's talk about that in terms of some higher math, you know, or some generalizations or some algebra. And that was where I really struggled because it took so much time for so many one-on-one conversations. So I'm open for ideas to go from there. Thanks.
Do you feel like, Allie, do you feel like that was like, are you talking like just during distance learning you were feeling like that, or just like in general?
No, like during distance learning, of course,
Yeah.
you know, for those last 3 months, because here we were with these big units on exponentials and transformations and quadratics. And I was trying to use those topics in our projects and in our public math and drawing outside and all these things they did, but then just extending it back to the math and out of just the patterns was really difficult.
Yeah. I think like, I mean, like hopefully that's the thing that we're getting better at is like figuring out what resources we have for that. I know that, is it Jamboard? Is that the one where you're able to have like the different pages and you can have kids like, you know, like everybody can kind of add their thinking, they can write, they can add pictures, like you can do breakout groups with that. I know one thing that me and Rachel did is a lot of times we'd have like a class like gallery, if that makes sense. And so like thinking about how you could use that gallery to even like, you have to, you know, to get maybe started on some conversations with that, like somebody could create the pattern and then somebody else has to generalize it and somebody else has to make that visual connection. but yeah, like I do agree. I think like that's like a super tough piece, and without having kind of like a district-wide plan for how students engage at the same time, that it does make it extremely challenging.
Well, one thing that I would suggest in that situation is I used to coach basketball, and I had to find a way to communicate with my students, okay? My players, I'm sorry, same thing. And what I did was I went to their platforms. So for example, I text messaged them information, or I would Snapchat them groups. I went to their format of social media for them to share their information. So what I envision in this situation is put it in some kind of social media form, such like Schoology or wherever you want to put it, and have them post their information, because when they see you respond to everybody else, you're going to answer multiple people questions. Plus you're using a media form that they're really into. These kids don't even watch TV anymore. They're on their phone all the time, you know, watching YouTube, etc. So you got to meet them where they're at. You basically put it in a social media form, and that's going to attract their attention. Plus, it reduces your workload, because when you answer one person question on that type of post, you're answering a lot of people. So that would be one suggestion that I would say to teachers who are having that kind of trouble in the situation. And I think it's similar to what Morgan brought up.
Yeah. I'll jump in really quick. Christy, just back to your point, I a couple questions ago, I put something in the chat. We had put together a document early on that just said what math is really involved in this, is what we called it, as a way to kind of just go back to when May was talking during the presentation about to kind of justify why the mathematics that we're doing is real mathematics and what it's actually building for students. So that just might be a helpful resource. There's also, we put together a sample like family letter home that kind of explains where this is coming from in case they had questions. I also saw in the chat that somebody was saying, what would happen with students who either aren't allowed outside or have spotty technology? One of the cool stories we had just this last year was somebody was teaching up at a place where they actually had zero contact with their students. They had to go put everything in a students come pick it up format. And they actually still really liked this opportunity, because whether or not they could have that back and forth with their students, they knew at least their students were going to make something that they could talk with their families about. So I think that's like the furthest end of the spectrum of how disconnected learning could be. But our hope is that somewhere along the way, students can make all of the examples we made could be made either indoors or outdoors, in case students, you know, still can't be outside, as well as, you know, it was kind of, we want student examples to help drive the learning as well. And so being able to, you know, be in there at that same time wasn't a necessity, because we were doing most of our stuff asynchronously last spring. But kind of the beauty moving forward, and some people were talking about Flipgrid, is that I think a big win here in driving learning as this project continues is using student examples. To Allie, what your question was using student examples to almost answer each other's questions, and to get, you know, to bring up the next day, so-and-so made this pattern. Let's talk, this is going to be our point of conversation for today. What could we do with this? How would this, you know, factor into factoring, right? How could this drive that kind of conversation and learning? If you can have a synchronous conversation, or you can do it asynchronously through a chat or a discussion forum.
And just
Yeah.
like bouncing off of that, Colin, I feel like last spring, like a big goal was to collect a ton of student examples and work to then like build on throughout the year. Because I know like Rachel and Morgan in their Algebra 2 class do a ton of work building off patterns. So like if we're building off patterns that are like student made from last year, that has even more like impact to starting new units. I don't know, Rachel, if you want to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. And we were even kind of hoping going into the beginning of the year that like they're going to generate a lot of patterns that they really don't know how to name yet. And that's a big part of what Algebra 2 is describing all these different types of functions. So our hope is that like we're going to get a lot of patterns that we're going to be able to use and build on, and then get different counting methods to show different expressions, and really just build on what they kind of already see, and then see that throughout the year.
Can I ask, because we've been talking about it, can I ask maybe, May, Morgan, Rachel, Sophie, Mariana. There was a question in the chat just about, given that we don't know our students coming in the fall, how are you maybe each individually taking this to build relationships, get to know your students? What are some practical ways that you as teachers are taking this to kind of get to know students and for them to feel comfortable sharing their work?
I mean, I plan on going slow to go faster later, and really taking the time to develop the technique. Whether that's, again, it really depends on kind of how that structure is set up. But if we're doing synchronous stuff, it will be like kind of doing some of those number talks together and then having them, like hopefully like analyzing it and like using different tools to have discussions later, but I think for me, like I am going to go slower to really dive into the technique of all of this. So that way, as the year gets rolling, we can go quicker. And
are you figuring this will be like a meeting like this with 30 kids, 35 kids all on Zoom showing their faces and talking to you while you're sharing your screen? Or that's what I can't visualize.
Yeah, I think with the number talk, I think that would be like a reasonable thing, and I think like you could do breakout sessions, and go to Jamboard and have like groups of 4 kids, each of them describing how they counted it, right? And so to me, like I would be really intentional about that number talk too, because then I would use that to build a visual pattern, for our next activity, so that we're like building upon that and developing it and using all of their ideas to like continue it, if that makes sense.
Can I ask how many of you, when you have a class meeting, my class looks a little bit like this, where there's 3 people with a camera and with a microphone on, and everybody else is just like a letter, and they're not present. You can't see them or hear them. They're just supposedly watching. I mean, that's how it is in middle school. I've got a screen of blank squares, and I can't see anybody. And if I'm talking, they're not talking really. And so I don't know how to... What's so easy in person is just impossible with middle schoolers. It seems like online like this.
Oh, I teach middle school too, Allison, and we haven't had to do any like synchronous like online learning. I've just had like office hours. But my plan, because I'm in kind of a unique situation too, because I potentially would be at school for 2 weeks and I'm on maternity leave. So I am really trying to build these relationships with these kids and then be gone. But my plan is, it's like Morgan, start slow. And for me, starting slow is doing how many, right? They are counting a total without counting one by one. And I feel like it's very safe for middle schoolers. And I'm not going to have them start with video or voice, because there are so many kids who are still afraid of video voice. Even though they'll go and show off on TikTok, that's a whole different platform compared to school, right? And so my plan is to do one example with them, and then they'll get another pattern, and they're gonna have to do their circling of like, okay, I counted by 2 by 2 by 2, but then they're also gonna have to show they're adding. They're like 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1 to get their total. And then submit that, because we have Schoology, and I want them to submit it as like a screenshot in a media album. Or you can do that on, I think Google Classroom has abilities like that too. But I just don't want them to start their voice or video yet. And I feel like that, okay, Ms. Vang is gonna, she knows me and I don't need to like talk yet. I don't even need to show my face yet either. But I'll give the option of like, if you feel brave and you wanna record yourself, go for it. But I think how many is, like with 7th graders, it's not too kiddish. It's not too little, like, it's not dumbing it down either, but it really is just getting them to be like, I can do this. It's the beginning of the school year. I don't really know my teacher. I've seen her in the hallways last year as a 6th grader, but I can do this. I just have to write and circle and then just submit it, but then it will build up to it, because I'm doing 2 weeks of this before I go on leave. And hopefully by the end, I will have kids recording themselves on their own accord. And if they don't feel like it yet, I'm really okay. And that's what we got to be okay with, is like kids who are not ready to show their faces or to have their voices be heard by others, especially if they're new to the school. Again, you're gonna have some kids who are like, whatever, I don't care, they'll just do it.
Right. And you're figuring they'll flip grid them and then share them all, because I really struggle getting kids to share their flip grids. Occasionally they would, but not much.
So I will, like, if they do video, they will flip grid it themselves. They will either, like, Flipgrid has like multiple ways to do it too. They can use the blackboard, the whiteboards. So it's really up to them how they want to do it. But if they don't want to record anything, again, literally just show me that how you circled, like circle your counting and show me your addition to get your how many.
And I think we're all going to struggle with that, Allie. Like, I really, truly do. This is,
right.
I mean, we've done distance learning, but we've done it with kids that we know. And this really will be something that we all kind of struggle and troubleshoot together. And I think, you know, it's okay to struggle. And right, like, in just because we want to do math with me and blah, 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 that doesn't mean like it's going to work out the way we see it in our head, right? Like, there are going to be some intense moments this year, for sure.
And I think though too, oh, go ahead, Mariana.
I had just going to your meetings, I had it the opposite way. So as soon as we would have a Google Meet, all my kids were talking at once, and I was sitting there trying to mute them as fast as I could, and they were unmuting themselves, and I had kids dancing in the background, and I had kids like taking the camera and wanting to show their installation and all this stuff. So it was like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work. We're not doing this as a group. So my big challenge this year is trying to get kids to interact in a positive and a system that works. So I think a lot of my beginning of the year stuff are outlined in my curriculum will be on establishing rituals and routines and getting to know my kids. So within the premise of the power of yet and having stamina and struggling, sorry, that's my dog, struggling through different things, and then also telling me about your family and who's in your family and what are you doing. And then once we get that going and I get to know them, and then moving on. Okay, Rachel, sorry.
I just really wanted to name that this is why this is so useful, is because all these tasks are purposefully very low floor, very high ceiling, very accessible, very non-judgmental, very take you from where you are and move you to, you know, where you want to go. And that is a way that we can use math to build a community within your classroom, because we want kids to show up. We want kids to have their cameras on. We want kids to talk to each other in a setting like this, and doing this in a way that feels really academically safe is going to help that, I think. I mean, it's not going to be a fix all, but it's going to definitely be a safer place to have math conversations. That makes sense.
That could be like another really beautiful thing about like the social media of us like sharing our work together. Like, you know, like it's not just about sharing the prompts on Twitter. It could also be like, hey, this is one way I got my kids to talk today, you know, and like hearing that not just from the people at your school or at your district, you know, like maybe California figures something out before we do and they're sharing it because of some of that work, you know, like I think like we need that collaboration and togetherness just as badly and deeply as the students do, right? Because it's like, you know, we've been professionals and we've been doing things that work for our entire career, and all of a sudden now like we're going into a space where those things aren't going to happen the way we're used to them happening. And I think it's like super scary, and it makes me super, super anxious the more and more I think about it, right? And so, yeah, like I want to learn along with every single person that's here, right? And not want to walk away from teaching, right? I want to walk into it instead of away from it. And last spring, I wanted to walk away from it, right?
Yeah, thanks everybody for sharing and being at the place. I think, you know, I read it. I'll admittedly, it felt kind of like a fortune cookie when I read it on Twitter last spring, but it's stuck with me ever since I read it, and I think it's why Morgan started with it. But the tweet literally just said, "Students need to Maslow before they can bloom," and it's just stuck with me that our students really just need a place where their voice actually has meaning, and not in kind of this trite or, you know, patronizing kind of way, but that their voice and the things that they can create are actually honored and valued and used. And that's, I think, what makes us so excited about this, is that we, you know, I don't think we're going to all of a sudden feel magically that our percentages of how many students are showing up every day is going to just raise all of a sudden from less than 50% like it was in the spring to 100. But we know that one of the ways that we can at least try to incentivize that is to make places where students actually feel belong. and valued, and that their work is, you know, appreciated and actually utilized. And so, yeah, I'm excited to even just see what comes out from the different teachers in St. Paul as they begin to think about how to build relationships through this platform. I do know, Sue, I can share my screen. There was a couple last slides that you wanted to talk about. Do you still want to?
Hi, yes. Thank you, everybody. Giant thank you to the Math with Me Minnesota team. You all are modeling just an incredible connection with each other, and Morgan even extending it, what you're trying to do with affect and disposition mindset with students to teachers. You all are just incredible. Your determination is amazing. But we wanted to share just briefly the upcoming sessions. And August 25th, Math on a Stick was mentioned, very connected to this movement here, Public Math with Me Minnesota, but also next week an equity conversation that we hope people will be willing to take part in. All of these links will be sent to you directly, but you can register also at the various places listed on the screen here. The August 18th panel discussion on plans for fall, we're hoping, again, a lot of sharing across districts for people to come to. So we're looking forward to those upcoming webinars, and possibly into the future if you all, different people through MCTM, are willing to still connect and reach out, as you all have said, not even just across Minnesota, but across the country and beyond. Just really briefly, Morgan is actually a presidential awardee for Minnesota. Thank you, Morgan. We did have our 2019 awardee announced just yesterday. So Jessica Mackin at Hiawatha Collegiate High School in Minneapolis is our 2019 awardee. That was a 7-12 year. We currently have 6-12 teachers for the 2020 year still in the works. That one was extended due to COVID last spring, so they're still working on applications currently. But we're up for the next one. So this program, unfortunately, is still continuing on. It is a $10,000 award for the awardee. So 7-12 for this next year. The nominations aren't up on the site quite yet, but please watch for that and make sure we get all of you wonderful teachers applying. And the next one, some contact information. Again, I hope you hear applause. Thank you so much for your willingness to be vulnerable and share your expertise, your persistence and dedication. What a wonderful example you all have been. So thank you. We'll get these recorded. We'll get emails sent out to you, more links for more registration. And thank you to all the participants for being on with us this morning. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.